Today we have Max Sakiewicz, who's an account executive at PandaDoc, actually one of the originals on the LDR team and the first outbound team at PandaDoc, and paved the way for newbies like me and Brandy to start their sales career. So Max, appreciate you coming on, man, and give us a quick background of where you came from and how you got to where you are today.
Cool, dude. Well, thanks for having me, guys. To put it quick, I came out of a program called Praxis. So there's a bunch of people at PandaDoc that came out of that program. Brandy's one of them. So she came out of that as well. So she knows it well. I originally was in college, hated it, dropped out. I was playing soccer at the University of Delaware. Really only went to college just to play on the team, and then just didn't want to do school anymore because I just hated it. So I dropped out, got into Praxis, did their boot camp for 6 months, interviewed at two different places. So I had two job offers, one at a hedge fund in Pittsburgh and then another being PandaDoc in St. Pete, Florida. So I obviously chose weather over anything else and picked PandaDoc. So I came down here. And then I've been here for about 2 years now. So I can't really complain. Everything's been really good. It's been fast, and the startup world is fun and software is interesting, but it's been a cool ride so far.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. And we have a lot of people that come on here from Praxis, pretty much similar story. They didn't go to school, went to college and hated it. I didn't go to Praxis myself, but I did go to college for a little bit. Same thing, wasn't a fan. Can you just tell us a little bit, like, what was it like, you know, not finishing college and then getting into the startup world?
It was easy for me. I just was so miserable doing like econ and all these other required classes that I had to take, that I didn't get to choose really. And I just wasn't a fan of it. So dropping out was easy for me. I had always been doing things that were a little bit different. For instance, the high school that I went to was the first of its kind. It was for soccer players. So I played for the Philadelphia Union, and they had a school specific to the team. So once you get on the team, you can go to the school there. And that was kind of similar approach. It was something that hadn't really been done before, not a normal path for kids my age, obviously. There was about 10 kids in my class. All of them were on my team. No one paid tuition to go there. It was just you had to be good enough to play, and then you get in. So for me, dropping out of college wasn't a really difficult decision. I didn't think that college was needed. The way I look at life and everything is just if you're talented enough and you work hard enough, you're going to make it no matter what. Obviously, there's some things that you can't control. But for the most part, talent always rises to the top. So if I believed in myself, which I did, that I would eventually end up doing something that I either loved or something that paid me pretty well. And luckily those things happened for me. So the decision to drop out and like that path and that whole process was pretty easy for me. It wasn't really a stressful time at all. It was just something that I knew I wanted to do.
Preach, man. Love that. Talent over everything.
Yeah, dude, I can't believe there was a soccer high school, a high school for soccer players. That's
Yeah.
like you hear about arts high schools, like Glee and High School Musical, that kind of thing. But like this is a whole nother world. I love that.
Yeah, well, I originally went there and I was in my junior year. I left for a couple months to go play in Portugal because I wanted to be a pro soccer player. So I went there. No, I was a senior in high school. I stayed there. I played for a team. I eventually got a contract offer, but then I just decided like this is not really what I want to do. And I kind of came to a crossroads. So I just came back, went to college because I didn't know what else to do. So that's I just kind of forced myself into going to school and then realized like, wait, I don't want to do this either. So it was kind of an interesting time period in my life to say the least.
So, like going along with just having that background, like sports in general, but specifically soccer, like how has that influenced your mindset now that you're in sales?
I'm just ultra competitive. I think that's what it is. And I would say most of the people that I work with in sales, from all the AEs to SDRs, the best ones at least, have always been competitive in some short, shape or another, or whatever it may be, whether they're competitive with their quota, with a sport that they play or a hobby, they're all competitive in one way or another. And that's kind of what's pulled things over for me. One thing that I always was interested in, more so than sports carrying over or like my competitiveness carrying over, was more of like was just always so interested in business. So when I came to PandaDoc, I wasn't so focused on, okay, like how am I going to close this deal? What kind of sales tactics do I need to learn? I was more focused with how does the business work? What are the operational aspects of it? And those are the things that I've always kept tabs on throughout my time here. And it's been cool to see going through every role because I've been able to figure out, okay, this is how the business runs in this instance. This is how the finance team keeps track of things. This is how the org runs as a whole. Because those are the things that I really wanted to learn that I wasn't learning in college. Because, business school is cool, but for the most part, my professors had never worked at a business. They've been teachers their whole lives for the most part, not in every case, but most of the time. So my biggest thing was, I wanted to learn the business really well, and I just so happened to be decent at sales. So that was the role that I fit into. So the biggest thing that I wanted out of this whole experience was to learn how to, run a business, how, a SaaS setup works, because, one day, ideally, I'd like to go and take the things that I've learned and do it for my own business. So that was kind of the biggest motivator. But being competitive, coming out of soccer, coming out of a super competitive environment like that school that I went to and that team I played on has definitely served me well because I was used to high pressure environments where, you have to play well in order to keep your spot. Same thing goes for sales. You have to hit your number in order to keep your job. So it transferred over pretty well, but that wasn't the main motivator for me or the main skill that helped me to succeed. I was just more focused on learning a lot about the business so I could take those things elsewhere.
Yeah, Max, I really like that mindset. And just going back to saying like teachers that have been teachers for a while. And, when I was in school, I took a couple business classes and the professors were actually pretty good, but they haven't worked in the business world since say the 80s, 90s.
Yeah.
Whereas obviously you learn real quick at PandaDoc, like the things we do now are tactics we couldn't use 1, 2 years ago because the
Yeah.
way things change so fast. So having a talent and just spending the time to learn the business is much more valuable than going and taking these classes at school. I know that's a kind of a biased thing to say and probably bold to some
Oh yeah,
people,
I
but
mean, I'll get crap from plenty of teachers and other people who love college, I'm sure. College isn't a terrible thing. Like, there's a lot of cool things you can learn at school. Like, you learn a lot about yourself. For instance, you're on your own for the first time for the most part. It's a great place to learn, different things if you come from more of a more sheltered background. But for me personally, I did a lot of things before I went to college. I had lived in another country. I had been other places, done other things, and college just wasn't something that I, cared about. I was more worried about, okay, I want to learn this now. I don't want to wait 3 years until I can take the classes I want to take. I want to learn things now and I'm more hands-on. So that was more of my process behind it. Yeah. And, I had like an econ professor who worked in the private sector for like 2 years and then started talking about, basic economics and things like that. And I was just like, I don't really care about this. I'm never going to use this. I'm not interested in econ. I don't care about it. So I'm just going to go and do my own thing.
yeah, man, definitely worked out for you. And just vouching for that mindset in general, it's worked out for a lot of people. We've seen that a lot of young people in our company doing very well.
Yeah.
But yeah, man. So I have a question for you.
Mhm.
You had an outbound script that you used that I remember hearing for the first time. I thought it's like, damn, like what? Like I would have never thought of something like this. It was the one about like asking for time on a cold call. Can you explain what that script was?
Yeah, for sure. So when I came to PandaDoc, I think like 99% of the deals that we closed, or even more, 99.9% were all inbound. Very few of them came from a self-sourced op where they had never heard of PandaDoc, nothing of that nature. So I came in there as an LDR. I was to help the SDR start to transition over to more of an outbound mindset by, cultivating leads and doing all that, grunt work, I guess you could say. About 2 months in, they're just like, hey, we can't do hybrid SDRs. We need to specialize. So we don't have any mechs. Do you want to do it? So I was like, sure. They're like, all right, awesome. We'll promote you. We'll make you an SDR. That'll be your full-time job. All you have to do is make calls every day. So I was like, all right, cool. That's better than typing into a data sheet all day. Like, I'd much rather do that. So I get there and I'm sitting down. I have no help. All the SDRs obviously aren't really that willing to help because they're focused on hitting their own number. None of the AEs really want to help me because they're more focused on, hitting their number. So I'm sitting there. I'm like, all right, well, I need to figure this out because I just don't know what to say on a call. I mean, I could just be nice and try to book a meeting, but at the same time, that's not really my personality. So I was sitting there trying to strategize through this and figure it out. So I made a few calls, just basic stuff. Like I would send out an email And then as soon as somebody opened that email, I would call them, reference that email. And that works because, they've seen it. And sometimes I get lucky and get a meeting. Other times, they're just like, oh, I'm not interested. I saw your email. I'm good. So I had no experience with objection handling or anything like that. I had booked a few meetings just because I called so many people, and numerically you're just bound to book a meeting after doing X amount of calls. So my first month I was making like 150 calls a day, just sitting there calling every single person on my list. And I would get lucky and get one, every other day. But then two AEs kind of heard me making these calls, and I guess they got a little bit excited about the prospect of closing outbound deals. Patrick and Luke, and they both kind of just helped me a lot in the whole process. So one thing that Patrick noticed right away is that my style of cold calling is very direct. And I'm the same way as an AE. If the deal's not going to close, I'm just going to take it out of my funnel. I don't even want to think about it. The same thing with a lead on my list. I don't want to think about it. If, I want to know yes or no, if they're going to be someone that I'm going to go with, or someone that I'm going to be able to book a meeting with. So I'm just as direct as possible. I want to spend as little time trying to woo them into a meeting as I can. And Patrick recognized that I'm a very direct person. The way I speak is direct. So he had mentioned to me something along the lines of, hey, you should just call them and be like, hey, just tell them it's a cold call right off the bat. So I was like, why would I say that? Most people hate cold calls. He's like, dude, just say it. Like, I think it'll bode really well for your personality. You'll be able to handle it pretty well, I think. So I was like, all right, whatever. So I did the first couple and I did it, and it didn't really did okay. And then he was like, well, why do you think it's not working that well for you right now? And I was like, honestly, I just I'm too afraid to hurt their feelings. Or not, I said something along the lines of I'm too afraid to hurt their feelings, or I'm intruding on their day, kind of and I feel like that's just an invasive thing for me to say over the phone. And he was like, dude, who cares? And I was like, what do you mean? He's just like, yeah, who cares, man? He's like, just make the calls. You're trying to book meetings. That's how you get paid. You're not saying anything rude to them. Do you think that PandaDoc brings them value? I was like, yeah, it's a pretty cool tool. I genuinely think it brings them value. He's like, okay, then you're not intruding on their day. Then you're helping them, build a better system for their proposals and their contract management and closing deals. So who cares? Just call them. You're trying to book meetings. So I was like, all right, that's true. I hadn't thought about it like that. I thought about it as oh, I'm bugging these people. Whereas my mindset changed to now I'm actually going to start trying to sell these people to help them out. So I kind of adapt this script, and basically my script had become, if I was talking to Andrew, I'd be like, hey, Andrew, this is a cold call. Do you want to give me 30 seconds to give you my little spiel? And then if you think it's BS, you can hang up. How does that sound?
Good.
And I would say 99% of the time they would laugh and say, yeah, sure, go ahead. So that's kind of where that started. And then obviously I had a few different variations. Some were shorter, some were longer, but the one with the BS in there was always the one that worked the best for me. And that's kind of where it came from. And then once I nailed that initial line down right off the bat, I had a really good value prop that was super short that asked a question at the end of it. And then from there, I just focused with Luke on objection handling, and I got really, really good at objection handling. So my strategy was less strategy based. It was more of I'm going to call a lot of people, and I've gotten really good at objection handling. So I'm just going to do that. And obviously, as I was in the SDR role for longer, I developed some strategies that helped me get more meetings too. But it was more of just getting that initial line down and then getting really good at objection handling, which what helped me a lot and has helped me a lot as an AE too.
Yeah, that's cool, man. I still remember hearing that script for the first time. It's just like, what? And then as you think about it, it makes sense. And I feel like it fits you, especially since you have a direct way of going about things and communication. And at the end of the day, if you don't say that, they're gonna know it's a cold call. It's not like
Yeah.
you don't tell them that. They're like, what's going on here? They know exactly what you're doing. And it was cool to see that work, man. I think that was a big way of paving, paving the way for the outbound team at PandaDoc, which actually leads me to my next question is what's so important about outbound? Because I know you as someone, you source a lot of your deals, even though you're a closer. I'm sure you learned how important it was as you were an outbound SDR, but what's so important about it?
I think my biggest thing was always yeah, it's really cool or really good for AEs to source their own deals. I always prefer when an SDR sources them because they're just going to do it way more effectively than I can as an AE. Because I'm more focused on closing deals that I have in my pipe, whereas an SDR, their main goal is to source outbound ops. So they're going to think of the strategies. Their job literally depends on getting those meetings in. But from an outbound sense of things, why it's so important, it's just another revenue stream for your business. Because let's say your inbound stuff dries up, which it has. You know, when coronavirus hit, for me, April was a tough month. You know, our inbound kind of dried up. People didn't really know what was going to happen. So April sucked. So that's when I really realized, like, all right, I really need to start getting back onto my old SDR stuff and start outbound prospecting. So that doesn't happen and my pipeline doesn't dry out that thin again, because I don't know what's going to happen, you know, next month. Who knows what's going to go on? So that's really the main thing, is just being able to have, you know, 5 or 6 extra deals a month that you book for yourself that you can work and pull revenue out of. That's the biggest thing from the AE side of things. And then from the SDR side of things, outbound's the best way to figure out how to talk to prospects on the phone. Inbound's awesome because you can ask a lot of technical questions and learn the process. But on the outbound side of thing, you're going to run into way more objections around your product. And that's going to help you figure out what the best way to convince somebody into a meeting is. And then once you learn how to objection handle and overcome certain hurdles that a prospect may give you, once you become an AE, it's going to help you a lot more because you're going to be way more comfortable talking about things that aren't that comfortable, like people's budgets or someone getting upset at you because your service doesn't offer a feature that they really need that they thought you had. And then you have to explain to them a workaround or a reason why this feature is going to help get over that. So there's so many different types of objections that you can run into during a demo or anything like that. By being an outbound SEO, it's going to help you way more and it's going to serve you better as an AE. It's just going to make you more successful. And the reason that I think this way is because Luke was kind of an outbound SDR when he first started. And, you know, as he became an AE and is now one of the best AEs at PandaDoc, he kind of showed me, hey, if you can objection handle somebody on a cold call, then doing it on a demo where someone's actually interested in the product is going to be way easier. So I think just doing outbound, regardless of what the motive is just helpful from any type of stance because it's going to help you in so many different aspects of objection handling.
Yeah, and I think the way you approached sales by having a mindset toward business and how businesses function probably gave you a better insight into who exactly you're talking to, what their day-to-day looks like, what challenges they're facing, because you understand business as a whole, or you were interested in understanding business as a whole. And then from there, it's like the techniques only work because of psychology and someone's pain points based on the way their business is or isn't functioning for them. And so it kind of all falls into place and makes you, you know, just a really powerful salesperson based on your original interest.
Yeah, and that's a good point. My demos and the way I run things are less presentation based and they're more question based. So my discovery can sometimes run up 15 minutes just because I want to know everything about their business, every single pain. And then even during the demos when I'm showing the product, I'm still asking questions about how is this going to work? How do you see yourself using this? How does this compare to your current process? So the more I can learn about their processes, one, because I'm interested in it and I just naturally ask questions that way. And two, it just helps me sell better because I know exactly the pains that they have. And then oftentimes you'll even recognize, like, when you're on a call with somebody, they'll tell you a pain that they didn't even initially think of. And they're like, oh yeah, this actually does happen a lot. This is a pain that we have. And then that's what Luke calls like a 4th or 5th level pain that you can pull out of somebody. And you're only going to get that by demoing and asking questions and actually being interested in the processes that they have and figuring out how PandaDoc or the sales tool that you're selling is going to, you know, better apply to that person's business case.
Exactly. Okay, Max, you're just such a powerhouse. I'm excited for this question. What is one time you felt like you failed in your career as a salesperson, and how did you overcome that?
I think so. I'll have 2 answers to this. The first part, I'll give it more sales sided. I wouldn't say I've had a ton of failures in sales. I think, especially at PandaDoc, I don't think a lot of people have like what you would call big failure unless they miss quota by a ton. For me, it was more of like cold calling's hard. And there was a lot of days where I just didn't book a meeting. And I'm like, man, this sucks. Like I've called 150 people today. 2 people answered. One guy told me to piss off, and the other guy was just like, "No, I'm good." So like I had a lot of those days. And I wouldn't say like that's a failure. I wouldn't view it as that, even though technically I failed to book a meeting and my quota required me to book a meeting a day. So I guess that's kind of a failure. But the thing that I took from that was get used to it. Like this is sales. This is and not even just sales, it's how life is. A lot of times like things aren't going to go your way. It's not going to be easy. You're going to have to push through things. So that was the biggest hurdle that I had to overcome. And that's just a very generic answer that I could give you because everyone who's an SDR that does outbound runs into that as well. So it's just like, yeah, you have to push through it, suck it up. Like it is what it is. Sometimes life sucks. Sometimes sales sucks. Sometimes you're not going to get a deal in or a meeting booked that you want. But that was the biggest hurdle that I had to overcome is just like, hey, calm down. Don't get stressed out over it. There's really no need. Just figure out what you did wrong, improve on it, and then move forward. But yeah, that's a very generic answer that I could give you that every salesperson runs into. For me, the biggest failure that I felt that I had in my life had nothing to do with sales at all. It was actually when I just didn't choose to become a professional soccer player. Like from the age of like 3 years old to 18, that's all I cared about. Like I literally went to a school where I trained twice a day. I had about 2 classes a day, and I just trained with other professional soccer players so that I could become that. And when I was 18 or 17 and I went over to Portugal and I played and I actually saw what my life was going to be like. And like, I won't trick anybody out. Like I was good, a really good soccer player in the United States. And then when I went over to Portugal, I was good, but I saw what my level would be. When you're around 17, 18, you start to figure out, okay, this is my level. This is probably where I'll end up. I was no like Cristiano Ronaldo or Messi or David Beckham or anything like that. I wasn't even close to that level. So I saw what my level would be. Um, and it didn't excite me anymore. And so I was like, I don't want to do this. So when I got my contract offer, it was, not a whole lot of money. I would have been living in a house with 3 or 4 of my teammates and in a country where I had no family or anything like that. So I think probably that was the toughest situation that I had to figure out because on one hand, I was like, man, I'm just quitting. I spent almost 17 years of my life trying to become this. And I feel like now I'm just being a quitter. But on the other hand, I was like, all right, Max, you have to be a little self-aware here and don't fog your head thinking, like don't fog your head with your dreams of just wanting to say you're a pro soccer player. When I was growing up, especially in high school, there were so many things that I was interested in, like business, like entrepreneurism, like sales, that excited me or started to excite me equally as much as soccer. So the biggest difficult thing that I had to overcome was actually saying, okay, you know what? Like soccer is not the only thing that I'm good at in my life. Let me figure out what I want to do. So I didn't accept that contract. I came home. My parents were not, or specifically my mom was not the happiest because she was like, oh, we drove to all these soccer games. Like you were on planes every weekend. You were never here. Like, why didn't you do it? It doesn't make any sense to me because I had never spoken to somebody about the way I was feeling internally. It was more of just like, yeah, whatever. I'll figure it out when it comes. So I come home and it's like, what do I do now? Like, I feel like a quitter, but at the same time, like, I feel like I had lifted something off my shoulders because now I'm open to exploring all the other things that I could do. Um, and then just business and sales and praxis came along, and it just turned out to be like the best thing ever for me. So, what was a really tough and like kind of a sad moment in my life for 2 or 3 months where I was just really sad that I didn't end up being the level at which I wanted to be, and I just wasn't as excited about soccer. I had lost that kind of passion to keep playing. I was super sad about that, and it was really kind of a big failure, I guess you could say, in my life. Turned out to be the best thing that's ever happened to me, and I've found a whole new, life in sales and in SaaS, and just like created a whole new life for myself in Tampa, and it's just turned out to be something that was awesome. So that was something that I really had to overcome. I learned a lot about myself, especially when I dropped out of college and was like, okay, like I'm not going to be a soccer player. Like, what are you going to do? And so I just took that failure and that moment as a time to where I could sit back, internalize what I did, why I did it, what were the motivations for doing it, figure out who I was as a person, which I wasn't able to do in college. And then I just took that kind of failure, I guess you could say, and turned it into something that actually happened to be really good and a huge, huge learning experience for myself. So it turned out to be probably the best thing that ever happened to me. But at the time it sucked ass and I hated it. So, but it turned out to be a good thing. And that was a while ago. So I'm 22 now, but it turned out to be a pretty awesome thing.
Yeah, man, I believe everything happens for a reason too. And I brought this up in a previous episode, but Dave Chappelle said, I think he took the quote from someone else, but sometimes you have to do what's best for you, even if it doesn't make sense to anyone else.
Yeah.
And a lot of the times that is a tough decision. And that's something you learn. And growing up as an adult or starting a career, it's just those decisions you have to make sometimes. And I think a lot of people become tunnel visioned on where they want to be and don't factor in anything else. So of course, as a kid, you were tunnel visioned on wanting to be a pro soccer player, which that's exciting, of course.
Yep.
But fortunately for you, you were able to be self-aware along the way. And instead of just going and doing that, thinking about every other factor. And I'm sure I've never been in a spot before where I almost went pro in something like a signature away like you were. But yeah, I don't know, man. I think that's great. I'm happy to hear it all worked out for you. But yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Max, I totally get that. Like word for word, step for step, your life just that's my life too. Like I'm in the middle of it though. It hasn't quite finished yet. Like things are just starting to look good, but like musical theater, art, like arts high school, like I mean studied in college, like professional, and then just kind of one day was like this isn't cut it. And explaining that to your family is one thing, to your friends, you just are always having that conversation. So
And it's a super hard thing to describe because you don't know how to describe it. You're just like, it just happened. It's just how I feel. I don't know what to tell you. Like,
yeah, it's like, I don't know if this is gonna last either, but I've got to do what I think is gonna be best for me, and it doesn't have to make sense to anyone else. Like that's how I found Praxis, and I actually like had to convince my parents that it was a good idea, which it
So
was.
that was the opposite story for me. For me, my dad heard Praxis on the news and told me about it. So I was planning on going back to college, but to study political science to be a lawyer, because I really was like super interested in like political science and politics and history and law, and I just was really good at writing and learning about that kind of thought process. So I was like, all right, I'm gonna go back to school. I'm gonna be a lawyer because that seems cool and I would be good at it and it'd be fun. And then my dad was like, no, I heard about this thing called Praxis. Like, you're way more interested in business. Like, check it out. And when he told me, I was like, no. I was like, that's stupid. Why would I do that? And then I saw it on the news by myself, and I was like, oh, all right, I'll check it out. Ended up applying, got in. I was like, all right, well, I guess I'll do this instead. But yeah, it was just, it's weird. Like, it's a weird way how things pan out. And now I'm in sales selling software, which I never thought I would be doing. But
Yeah,
End of the day, man.
you're like crazy good at it. Which
Yeah, and you had fun too, man. It's not like you did that all for
oh, yeah.
nothing. Like
Yeah.
playing soccer, like you loved it enough where you wanted to go pro. So there should, I hope, I assume not, but there shouldn't be any regret of doing what you did because I'm sure that was a blast to do. But
It was fun.
every
It's been fun.
yeah,
It's been fun. If it wasn't that fun, I probably wouldn't be doing it. Which is why I
yeah,
dropped out of college because it sucked and I hated it. Not doing
yeah.
this. So
well,
yeah,
Max, we've got one last question for you, man.
sure.
So I'm wondering what's one thing that someone can do today to get better at sales?
Yeah. So this is one thing that I asked myself too when I first started. And this kind of goes back to Patrick saying to me, hey, like you're a pretty direct guy. Like I think this script would work for you. I think being self-aware enough to know what your personality type is. Because if you look at, for instance, like Luke, who I work with, who has a very different personality than I do. Obviously, we're really good friends, but he has a very different personality than I do. And he sells in a different way than I do. I try to take a lot of the things that he does because he's so good at it. But our personalities are very different. Like my personality to Patrick's personality is extremely different. We sell in very different ways. Patrick is more, rapport based, tells jokes, likes to pull out pain and do things a certain way. Whereas I'm more direct. I ask direct questions. I'm more like process oriented, and I sell very differently and I have a different style. Doesn't mean I don't take tactics away from him, but I think the biggest thing is just learn who you are and what your tone is, especially when you're an SDR too, because everyone has a different tone on the phone. So they have a different style, a different personality that comes across over the phone. So learn what that is. Take the best tools that you can from other people who are good at it, but then try to make it adapt to your personality, because that's what's going to help you become the best. And I can speak to being an SDR really, really well, because that was like the thing that I learned and honed really, really well. As an AE, I'm still learning. I'm relatively new as an AE compared to, my colleagues who've been doing it for 5 years. I've only been doing it for a year and change. But like, just learn who you are as a person, as a salesperson, and then figure out how you can best fit those tools into your personality traits to kind of create your own style. I think is the best thing. And also just be open to learning. Everything, as generic as that sounds, just be open. Take everything that you can, any type of information that, someone successful gives you about sales, take it in, absorb it, and keep what's good and throw out what you think is bad. And then just kind of adapt it to your style. I think is the biggest thing, because there's a lot of times where people try to stick within such a rigid, like set of processes for sales. And sometimes it just doesn't fit their personality that well. So I think you might have to adapt it to kind of fit you better, so it sounds better coming across to the prospect. So I think just figuring out who you are as a salesperson and then adapting some tools and skills that you learn to fit yourself is the biggest thing. That's what's helped me the most, at least.
Yeah.
It's great advice, man. Appreciate that. But we want to thank you for coming on and talking with us today. Definitely give us some good insight, and we wish you the best of luck moving forward, man. Happy to see you keep growing.
Thanks, dude.